Today we're talking about beta-alanine and sodium bicarb, and which is better, beta-alanine or sodium bicarb? Technical difficulties. Okay, so some disclosures. A lot of you know I've been doing dietary supplement research till 1995, and over the past 30 years, I've received funding to conduct research in this area. A lot of people don't know, but I've published the very first beta-alanine study in the United States because of the guy I'm standing right next to in this picture, Roger Harris. And Roger Harris actually is also the person that really got the creatine research going. But a lot of people don't know that beta-alanine was his first love, or at least carnosine. And he's the one that turned me on to this research back in 2004. So before you can ever compare how supplements work, whether one works better than the other, or if they work at all, there's a few things we need to know. One is, what is the mechanism? Because if we don't know what the mechanism is, we don't know if it works. We're just guessing. The other thing is if there is a legitimate mechanism, then we need to determine what is the best dosage, what is the timing, and so forth for maximal performance benefit. It's only then can we decide which supplement is superior or if they work best together. So we have to understand, what we're talking about here. And one of the things is peripheral fatigue or metabolic fatigue. And there's a lot of different ways in which our muscle can fatigue. One is substrate depletion, and depending on intensity, it's really going to come down to metabolic accumulation. And metabolic accumulation can affect the pH of the cell. It reduces the functionality of everything. So it affects the ability for contraction due to limited energy production, decrease in calcium release and uptake, and so on. Well, what we're going to talk about and focus on today are two supplements that may affect hydrogen ion production, which lowers the pH of the cell. And our ability to buffer, this hydrogen ion is referred to as muscle buffering capacity. So imagine the greater muscle buffering capacity, the greater you should be able to perform at this high intensity level. Okay, so what exercise produces, or what kinds of exercise produces this high concentration of hydrogen ions? Well, a lot of people don't realize this, but resistance training, hypertrophy training in particular, high reps, anytime you're increasing lactate levels, you're also producing a lot of hydrogen ions. Repeated sprints, repeated muscle contractions with minimal rest. There are sports examples like soccer during the sprinting phase, basketball, boxing, wrestling, rowing, judo, cycling, and so on. So being able to buffer hydrogen ion may affect performance in all of these sports. Even at the submax level of VO2 max, running around what we call the anaerobic threshold, depending on how good shape you're in, it can be anywhere from 65 to 85% of your VO2 max. And we've seen studies in which when we improve the muscle buffering capacity, we actually enhance anaerobic threshold. So again, being able to buffer hydrogen ions and attenuating that drop in pH within the muscle cell, we may see improvement in performance, especially, and sports performance specifically. So now that we know the problem, which is these darn hydrogen ions, how can we prevent the buildup of this concentration and improve sport performance? Well, remember I said, if we can increase muscle buffering capacity, we can improve performance. Well, we can do this both supplementation-wise and through training. We know that when we do sprint interval training or even high intensity training, we have this increased adaptation of muscle buffering capacity, which is why our performance increases under high intensity stress. But there are also nutritional supplements that can do that. And two of those that we're going to talk about are beta-alanine and bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate. But what's really interesting is that when you look at athletes in different sports and you look at their muscle buffering capacity, you can see where the repeat sprint sports like hockey, basketball, soccer, they had the greatest muscle buffering capacity, where you have sort of the middle distance and our long distance runners, they're still higher than the sedentary. That's me eating some chips, watching some TV. I have a very low muscle buffering capacity. Um, so when we talk about the mechanism in a little bit of detail, the human body has basically two ways of buffering sort of this hydrogen ion production. It's called two lines of defense. One is the first line of defense, which is intracellular. So this is intracellular bicarbonate buffering system, which includes bicarbonate, amino acids, inorganic phosphate, and even creatine phosphate. So we've already talked about creatine phosphate. I'm not going to talk about here, but it can buffer some of these hydrogen ions, not to the extent of the other two nutrients we're going to talk about, though. And we have another intracellular non-bicarbonate buffering system, which is beta-alanine, actually carnosine. So if you look at this molecule up here, as we produce a bunch of hydrogen ions, carnosine will take on and reduce hydrogen ions. And so then it helps to maintain, intracellular pH. Now you can only imagine if we have more of this, the more hydrogen ions we can buffer. And so there's even some scientists, I would say Roger Harris would say, that carnosine may buffer hydrogen ions at a higher rate during intense exercise compared to intracellular bicarbonate system, not extracellular. So the second line of defense is where sodium bicarbonate does its magic. So there's two ways from a second line defense is like moving those hydrogen ions out of the muscle cell. The other one is the extracellular bicarbonate buffering system. So when we supplement sodium bicarbonate, we increase bicarbonate in the blood, or we elevate the pH in the blood. This actually will help drive the hydrogen ions out of the muscle cell and into the bloodstream, where then it's converted to CO2 and water. And this sort of does the same thing as it does the first line of defense by eliminating and maintaining the pH of the cell. It's just known as a second line of defense. So basically, the two of these nutrients do the same thing. One works a little bit different than the other, but the bottom line, the goal is the same. So what is the best strategy for supplementing beta-alanine? Well, if you don't eat meat, then you're probably low on carnosine within the muscle, because we know carnosine naturally occurs only in meats, every animal-based type protein. So when we consume carnosine that's found in meats, it is rapidly broken down by the enzyme carnosinase. And by the way, this is only in humans. So when we compare supplementing carnosine in humans or versus animals, you can't really do that. Because we're not the same. Beta-alanine and histidine, once they're broken down in the blood, they can be transferred or they go to the skeletal muscle where they're taken up into the muscle system. And what's interesting is that once they're in the muscle, they are then bound by carnosine synthase to create the dipeptide again. So you break it down and then it transfers the main ingredients to the muscle and then it's resynthesized, right? So the rate limiting aspect of that is beta-alanine, because histidine is already at a high level, high concentration level within the muscle. So really we don't need the histidine, but beta-alanine is very low. So we need beta-alanine to trigger the synthesis in order to increase carnosine within the muscle. So when you look at this, long-term effects of training and diet on skeletal muscle carnosine, you see that bodybuilders, and remember I said resistance exercise, hypertrophy type, has an increased hydrogen ion, elevation, and this could be a trigger to adaptation over time for strength and power athletes to have more carnosine within the muscle. And you can see that people who don't consume meat in their diet, like vegetarians, they have the lowest level even lower than elderly men and women of carnosine levels. So let's talk about sodium bicarbonate and, I'm sorry, we're going to talk about beta-alanine real quick here first. The best supplement strategy was mentioned by Tim already, taking in about 6.4 grams for 4 weeks. So you divide that in 4 doses and you get about 172 grams. You need at least this amount to increase minimally carnosine concentration in order to see an improved performance. So this is the minimal amount of dose. Okay, so around 180 grams over a 4-week period is what you need to consume. Interestingly, there was a study published not too long ago that hypothesized that we haven't reached saturation level of carnosine. Remember, the more carnosine you have, the more hydrogen ion you can buffer. So when you take a look at, being able to dose a much longer period of time, it is possible to significantly increase carnosine levels that would theoretically reach a saturation point. So in this case, you're consuming that 6.4 grams a day for almost 200 days in order to reach this total estimated gram amount of 1,200 to, 1,500 grams. That's a long time to supplement. But, if you're able to do that, you would see a true saturation and we may see a much greater ergogenic benefit. Okay, and that's pretty much what Professor Sale said. It's not necessarily about the timing of beta-alanine, it's the total content over time. So this is a chronic strategy. So what is the best strategy for sodium bicarbonate? Well, there's been a lot of research on sodium bicarbonate, and I'm not going to go through all the studies, but I thought this one review did a really good job at looking at, what do you need to increase the blood bicarbonate level to see an ergogen effect? And it says around at least greater than 5 millimolar is what you need to see. So how much sodium bicarb do you need to consume to reach this level? At least 0.3 grams per kilogram body weight. You need to supplement at least 60 to 180 minutes before exercise or competition. So when you look at the performance benefits, it's interesting because there's been a lot of studies between the two of them that have shown performance enhancement in endurance activities like the anaerobic threshold thing, various combat sports. There's been studies in boxing, karate, judo, taekwondo, wrestling, high intensity cycling, running, swimming, rowing, just a lot of things that will put us in this really super high intensity, whether it's briefly or repeatedly or continuously. And there seems to be this sweet spot, this ergogenic potential, and actually was brought up by Tim earlier, 30 seconds, but as high as 10 minutes. So we're seeing that both, and it makes sense, right? Because both of these goals, or these supplements goals, are to eliminate or to attenuate hydrogen ion buildup and reduce pH within the cell. When you look at all the different potential sports that could benefit from this, you can see that some kind of overlap, because some of these sports do have high intensity sort of bursts within them, not always, but you can see all the different sports. I won't get into these. But some have been researched and some have not. Now, what is the performance benefit if we supplemented beta-alanine and or sodium bicarbonate? Is there an additive effect, or is one better than the other? Well, one of the best, I know there's been other systematic reviews that have looked at this, but I didn't like them because I thought they threw in some studies that shouldn't have been put in there due to lack of control. So the one by Saunders et al. I thought was the best, where they really looked at the combination of beta-alanine and sodium bicarb. And what they found with all the studies they reviewed was that indeed there was a benefit to adding both. And so basically what you're doing is you're increasing both the intracellular, that first defense, and the extracellular or secondary defense and you're enhancing that buffering capacity in two ways, and you see this enhanced performance. And these were these were upper body, lower body type of testing. So it's very interesting. There seems to be a trend towards that. So I always like to go over just one of these studies I thought was really good because a lot of you know, maybe not know. I'm a love combat athlete. My kids competed in judo at the very highest level. I have one daughter still trying to make the Olympic team, and she actually takes beta-alanine. So in this study, they actually looked at elite training, elite male judo and jiu-jitsu competitors. They had 4 groups: beta-alanine, sodium bicarb, and then the combo. They did what we had suggested, the minimum that you need to do for supplementation with beta-alanine. The sodium bicarb was actually much higher with over a 7-day period. And basically, if you know what a Wingate test is, they did 4 Wingate tests with 3-minute recovery bouts and looked at total work. What's interesting is that beta-alanine and sodium bicarb alone did exactly the same thing. They increased performance 7 to 8%. But when you combine them, they doubled. So it enhanced the benefit by adding them both. And what's also interesting, it reduced RPE. And sometimes RPE could be a sense of, that exertion, that pain you're feeling, and it seemed to lower that. And it increased blood lactate, which makes sense, right? Because if we're buffering hydrogen ion, we can train harder. It produces more lactate. So lactate should go up. It should not be buffered. So those studies that show that beta-alanine or sodium bicarb attenuate lactate, that can't happen. So is there one better than the other? Well, been a bunch of studies that have looked at this, and there's really no definitive evidence that suggests that one option is better than the other. But here's the difference. Beta-alanine, you need to supplement at least 4 weeks. And I would suggest longer in order to really realize the benefit. Whereas sodium bicarbonate, you see a similar performance enhancement, but you see it in a very acute sort of way. So it's up to you whether you want to use one or the other, and if you wanted to use the combo. So again, when we're looking at the use of beta-alanine or sodium bicarb, it's recommended, for this 30 seconds to 10-minute sort of window. And you may see a benefit from either or a combination. And remember the supplementation, that minimum dose for both beta-alanine and for sodium bicarb. And remember, sodium bicarb, you don't consume all that in one big drink. I made that mistake one time. Oof, was not good. But what you need to do is separate that amount into doses over 30-minute intervals, 90 to 120 minutes before you exercise. Athletes, I can't stress this enough, athletes who want to boost this performance, when you're generating these kind of levels of hydrogen ion, you got to practice with these supplements before competition, especially with the sodium bicarb. You don't want to do sodium bicarb for a main event because you may pay for it without practicing, because some of the potential side effects to consider, especially with sodium bicarb, is provoke severe GI stress, gas. It's just an awful feeling.